The crystal chandeliers of the grand Astoria ballroom dripped light like frozen diamonds, illuminating a world of champagne and whispered fortunes. Among the elite, Madeline Cranston felt like a ghost, the delicate fabric of her gown a poor shield against the chilling neglect of her husband, Isidore. He stood across the room, a king in his element, his laughter a sharp sting in her ears. Beside him, Bianca Reed, draped in scarlet, smiled a predator's smile. Madeline, with one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, knew this night was a precipice. She was about to lose everything, and the fall would be witnessed by all. The Cranston name was a dynasty, etched into the steel and glass of the city's skyline. Isidore Cranston, the sole heir to Cranston Holdings, was a man sculpted from privilege and pressure. Madeline had met him not in a boardroom, but in a small, dusty bookstore where she worked while studying art history. He'd been charming, seemingly captivated by her quiet world, a stark contrast to his own. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance that felt like a fairy tale, a prince choosing a commoner. But the moment she said, "I do," the fairy tale began to curdle. The gilded cage of their penthouse apartment, with its panoramic views of the city, started to feel more like a prison. The man who had loved her quiet nature now criticized it as unbefitting a Cranston wife. Her simple tastes were deemed embarrassing her friends from her old life, subtly pushed away. The true ruler of their lives was not Isidore, but his mother, Genevieve Cranston. A woman with eyes like chips of ice and a spine of steel, Genevieve had never approved of Madeline. To her, Madeline was not a daughter-in-law, but a strategic misstep, a temporary impurity in their pristine bloodline. A Cranston wife must be an asset. Madeline, not a liability. Genevieve would say her voice a silken threat during their excruciatingly formal weekly dinners. Your background is a challenge. You must work harder to overcome it. Isidore, once her defender, now sat silently during these lectures, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on his plate. He was a different man, in his mother's presence weaker, more eager to please the charming prince, replaced by a petulant boy. Then Madeline discovered she was pregnant. It was a secret she held close for weeks, a flickering candle of hope in the growing darkness. This, she believed, would change everything. A child and heir would solidify her place in the family. It would bring Isidore back to her, remind him of the love they once shared. When she finally told him, his reaction was muted. There was no joy, no tender embrace. Instead, he stared at her burgeoning belly with a look of detached calculation. "A son, I hope," he'd said before, turning and walking away to take a phone call. "Mother will be pleased." It was then that the name Bianca Reed began to surface. At first, it was a whisper from the staff, a name on a credit card statement Isidore carelessly left on his desk. Bianca was the daughter of a rival family, a woman Genevieve had once championed as a perfect match for Isidore. She was everything Madeline was not, bold, ruthless in her ambition, and born into the same world of cutthroat luxury. Madeline tried to ignore it, to dismiss the late-night texts Isidore received the scent of a strange perfume on his suits. She focused on the upcoming annual Cranston Foundation Gala, the pinnacle of the city's social calendar. This year it was being held at the Grand Astoria Ballroom. She would be poised, graceful, the perfect pregnant wife. She would stand by Isidore's side and prove to Genevieve, to everyone, that she belonged. She chose her dress with meticulous care, a flowing gown of deep sapphire that celebrated her pregnancy rather than hiding it. It was a statement of hope, a silent plea. On the night of the gala, as the chauffeur-driven car pulled up to the red carpet, Isidore finally spoke to her. He didn't look at her, but at their reflection in the tinted window. "Bianca will be there tonight," he said, his voice flat. "Behave yourself. Do not make a scene." The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a confession. It was a command. He wasn't asking for her understanding. He was demanding her compliance. The candle of hope she had been nurturing within her flickered violently, threatening to extinguish completely. As she stepped out of the car into the blinding flash of cameras, Madeline knew her performance tonight was not for the society pages, but for her very survival. The Grand Astoria ballroom was a dizzying spectacle of power and wealth. Conversations were transactions, and smiles were weapons. Madeline navigated the glittering crowd with a practiced grace. She didn't feel her own smile a fragile mask. She accepted hollow congratulations on her pregnancy from people whose names she barely remembered, their eyes darting over her shoulder, searching for someone more important. Isidore had abandoned her the moment they entered, drawn into a circle of powerful men, where billion-dollar deals were discussed over cocktails. Madeline found a quiet alcove near a towering ice sculpture of the Cranston Holdings logo, one hand instinctively cradling her belly. The baby kicked a small, reassuring flutter, and for a moment she felt a surge of strength. This was not just about her anymore. Then she saw her. Bianca Reed was holding court, a vibrant splash of scarlet against the more muted tones of the other guests. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a flute of champagne held aloft. And Isidore was right beside her, his arm resting possessively on the back of her chair. He was smiling a real smile, the kind Madeline hadn't seen directed at her in years. It was a knife twisting in her gut. Genevieve Cranston materialized at Madeline's side, her presence as cold as the ice sculpture next to them. "You see," Genevieve murmured, her gaze fixed on the couple across the room. "That is what a power couple looks like. Influence lineage. Bianca understands what is required." "He's my husband," Madeline whispered, her voice trembling. "A temporary arrangement," my dear Genevieve replied, turning her chilling eyes on Madeline. "You've served your purpose. Once the child is born, provided it is a healthy son, your role in this family will be reevaluated. Don't delude yourself into thinking this is a marriage of love." The cruelty of the words stole her breath. She had been nothing more than a vessel, a means to an end. The love she thought she had, the life she thought she was building, it was all a lie, a business transaction she had been too naive to understand. Rage, cold and sharp, pierced through her shock. It was a foreign feeling, but a powerful one. She would not be dismissed like a redundant employee. She would not stand by and watch her life be dismantled before her eyes. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and walked across the polished marble floor. The crowd seemed to part for her as she approached Isidore and Bianca's table. Every eye in the room was on her. The whispers followed her like a rustle of dry leaves. Isidore saw her coming, his smile vanishing, replaced by a dark scowl. Bianca, however, simply watched her approach, a look of amused curiosity on her face. Isidore Madeline said, her voice steady, despite the frantic pounding of her heart. "I believe it's time for us to leave." Bianca let out a soft, mocking laugh. "Oh, don't be a bore. The party's just getting started." She looked up at Isidore, her hand stroking his arm. "Your little wife seems tired." "She's right, Isidore. Your pregnant wife is tired," Madeline said. meeting Bianca's gaze with a directness that made the other woman's smile tighten. "It's time to go home. Now." Isidore stood up slowly, his face a mask of thunder. He was embarrassed. In his world, public perception was everything, and his mousy, insignificant wife was daring to challenge him in front of everyone, in front of Bianca. "We'll leave when I say we leave," he snarled, his voice low and menacing. "I won't stand here and be humiliated." Madeline insisted, her newfound courage refusing to desert her. "I am your wife. This child is your heir. You will show us some respect." Bianca laughed again, louder this time. "Respect? Darling, you have to earn respect, and all you've done is trap him with a pregnancy. How very common." The word common hung in the air, a deliberate, poisoned dart. It was Genevieve's word, the ultimate Cranston insult. And hearing it from the lips of her husband's mistress, while he did nothing, was the final straw. The fragile dam, holding back months of pain and humiliation, finally broke. "You will not speak to me that way," Madeline said, her voice rising. "And you?" She turned to Isidore, her eyes blazing. "Will not allow it." The atmosphere around their table had grown taut, a bubble of silence expanding in the heart of the noisy gala. The music seemed to fade, the chatter of the city's elite dying down, as dozens of pairs of eyes turned to witness the unfolding drama. This was better than any gossip column, more riveting than any market fluctuation. This was the Cranston dynasty exposed and raw. Isidore's face was a mottled canvas of fury and shame. Madeline had done the one thing he could not forgive. She had made him look weak in his own arena, in front of his peers, his mother, and, most importantly, Bianca. His authority had been questioned, his carefully crafted image of control shattered by the one person he considered utterly powerless. "You are making a scene," he seethed, stepping closer, his imposing frame casting a shadow over her. His breath was hot with the smell of expensive whiskey. "You created this scene, Isidore," Madeline retorted, refusing to back down. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice was clear. "When you decided to flaunt your affair in front of the entire city. When you forgot you had a wife and a child on the way." Bianca remained seated, watching the exchange with the detached interest of a spectator at a gladiator match. A small, self-satisfied smile played on her lips. She had won. She had pushed Madeline to this point, orchestrated this public implosion, and now she was reaping the rewards. Every pleading, angry word from Madeline's mouth only made her seem more hysterical, more unfit, while Bianca herself remained the picture of poised elegance. "That's enough," Isidore growled. He grabbed Madeline's arm, his fingers digging into her skin like talons. "We are leaving, and you will be silent." Madeline wrenched her arm free. "Don't you touch me." The raw, unvarnished emotion in her voice surprised even herself. "I am not one of your corporate assets. You can silence and control," I said. Isidore repeated, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. "Enough." He moved with a speed that was shocking. His hand, the one that wore the heavy gold Cranston signet ring, flew through the air. The sound was not loud, but it was sharp, definitive, and utterly sickening. It cracked through the ballroom's hushed anticipation like a whip. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. For a frozen second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Madeline's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. A searing, white-hot pain exploded across her cheek. The shock was so profound, so absolute, that it momentarily eclipsed the physical hurt. Time seemed to slow down. She could see the horrified faces of the guests, the stunned expression of the waiter holding a tray of champagne flutes, the wide, disbelieving eyes of a woman she'd been introduced to just an hour earlier. And then her gaze found Bianca. The mistress's smile was no longer small or subtle. It was wide, triumphant, and unapologetic. It was a bourse grotesque expression of victory that reveled in Madeleine's utter degradation. In that single hateful smile, Madeleine saw the truth of everything. This was what Bianca had wanted. This was the checkmate. Slowly, Madeleine raised a trembling hand to her cheek. It came away wet. A thin trickle of blood ran from the corner of her lip where the ring had cut her. She looked at her husband, the man she had once loved with all her heart, the father of her unborn child. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at his own hand. A flicker of something. Was it shock, regret in his eyes? But it was fleeting. His expression hardened again as he met his mother's steely gaze from across the room. He had passed Genevieve's test. He had proven where his loyalties lay. Without a word, Madeleine turned. She didn't run. She walked. Head held high, back straight, she moved through the sea of silent, staring faces. Each step was an agony of will. She could feel their pity, their morbid curiosity, their judgment. They were whispers and shadows, and she pushed through them, focusing only on the grand, ornate doors of the ballroom. As she walked, the pain in her cheek began to throb in time with her heartbeat. But a different sensation was rising to meet it, a cold, hard clarity. The gilded cage had not just been opened, it had been utterly demolished. The slap was not an end, it was a beginning. It was the sound of her old life shattering, and in the echoing silence, she would build a new one from the pieces. The last thing she heard before the doors closed behind her was Bianca's soft, victorious laughter. The taxi ride was a blur of smeared city lights and the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers against a sudden downpour. Madeleine directed the driver to a part of the city Isidore had never seen, to a small, unassuming brownstone she still owned from before her marriage, her only remaining tether to her old life. She had kept it against the advice of Isidore's lawyers, who had wanted to liquidate all her common assets. Now, it was her sanctuary. Inside, the air was stale and dusty. She didn't turn on the lights, sinking to the floor in the darkness of the living room, the sapphire gown pooling around her like spilled ink. The adrenaline that had carried her out of the ballroom receded, leaving behind a pain so vast and hollow, it threatened to consume her. Sobs racked her body, and guttural sounds of a heart breaking. She cried for the love she had lost, for the man who had never really existed, for the future that had been stolen from her. She cried until she was empty, until the only sound was the rain lashing against the window panes. She spent the next 2 days in a daze, ignoring the incessant buzzing of her phone. Dozens of calls from Isidore, likely prompted by lawyers for damage control. Texts from concerned friends she had neglected. Voicemails from Genevieve, which she deleted without listening to. The world outside didn't exist. There was only the quiet dustiness of the apartment and the tiny life stirring within her. On the third morning, the sun broke through the clouds. Madeleine forced herself to stand her limbs stiff. She looked at her reflection in a dusty mirror. A bruise, ugly and purple, bloomed across her cheek. Her eyes were swollen, but they held a new hard light. The victim was gone. She needed to think, to plan. She began to sort through old boxes, remnants of her parents who had passed away years ago. Her father, Thomas, had been a university librarian, a quiet gentleman who loved books more than people. Her mother was a freelance artist. They had lived a simple, happy life, and their loss had left a hole in her heart that Isidore had once promised to fill. In a worn leather box filled with her father's personal effects, she found a small, ornate brass key and a sealed envelope addressed to her in his familiar neat script. Her name, Madeline, was written on the front. She'd never seen them before. Her fingers trembled as she broke the wax seal. Inside was a letter and a single, formal-looking document. "My dearest Madeline," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means you are in a time of great need, and I am no longer there to guide you. I apologize for the secrets I have kept, but I did so only to give you the chance at a normal life, a life of your own choosing, unburdened by the weight of money. I was not just a librarian, my love. That was my passion, but it was not my profession. In my younger years, I was a quantitative analyst and a private equity investor. I was by all accounts very successful. I walked away from that world because I saw what it did to people, how it could corrupt the soul. But I never abandoned the fruits of my labor. The key in this envelope is for a private vault at Sterling Trust Bank on 5th Avenue. Inside you will find all the documentation you need. I have established a blind trust in your name, managed by my most trusted friend and colleague, a man who is more a brother to me than anything. His name is Walter Hemlock. The contents of this trust are significant. It has been growing, compounding for over 20 years. It is yours and yours alone. It is a legacy of protection, a shield for you in a world that can be cruel. Use it wisely. Use it to be happy. But most of all, use it to be free. All my love, Dad. Madeline read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through her tears. A librarian. Her quiet, bookish father was a secret financial genius. She unfolded the other document. It was a summary statement of the trust's assets, dated just 6 months ago. She scanned the columns of numbers, her eyes widening in disbelief. The figures were astronomical, a string of zeros that seemed to defy reality. The estimated value at the bottom of the page was not in the millions, but in the hundreds of millions. And then she saw the list of primary holdings. Her breath hitched. The trust held significant controlling stakes in a dozen major corporations. Near the bottom of the list was a name that made her blood run cold. There, in stark black and white, was a holding of 15% of the Class A voting shares of a publicly traded company, Cranston Holdings. The slap at the gala had been an act of power meant to put her in her place. But her quiet, unassuming father had left her an arsenal. Isidore and Genevieve thought they had all the power that their name and their money made them gods. They had no idea that a quiet librarian had made his daughter their single largest outside shareholder. They had cast her out, humiliated her, and in doing so they had just handed the keys to their kingdom to their greatest enemy. The following day, Madeline walked through the towering bronze doors of the Sterling Trust Bank headquarters on 5th Avenue. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth, a cavernous space of polished marble and hushed reverence where footsteps echoed and money spoke in quiet, confident whispers. This was her father's world, a universe she never knew existed, and she felt like an imposter stepping into its sacred halls. She wore a simple but impeccably tailored black dress, a stark contrast to the vibrant sapphire she had worn to her public execution. The bruise on her cheek was a faint, yellowing shadow under her makeup, a hidden reminder of her purpose. She was escorted not to a teller's window, but to a private elevator that ascended silently to the executive suites. There, in a corner office with a breathtaking view of Central Park, a man with silver hair and kind, intelligent eyes stood to greet her. He was dressed in a classic tweed jacket that seemed more suited to a university library than a bastion of high finance, a detail that immediately put her at ease. "Madeline," he said, his voice warm and gentle, devoid of the pity she had come to dread. "I am Walter Hemlock. Your father was the best man I ever knew. I have been waiting for this day, though I prayed it would never come." He didn't ask about the scandal, her marriage, or the shadows under her eyes. He simply treated her with a quiet, profound respect that felt like a balm on her wounded soul. He led her to a pair of leather armchairs near the window, and for the next hour he didn't speak of numbers or assets. He spoke of her father, Thomas. He called this world the Great Machine. Walter recalled a fond, sad smile on his lips. He was a genius at understanding how it worked, how to make it turn. But he saw what it did to the people who served it. He used to say that numbers could build empires or prisons, and he'd seen too many men build their own gilded prisons. So he walked away. He chose books and a quiet life. He chose you. Tears welled in Madeline's eyes as she listened. Walter was giving her back a piece of her father she never knew, painting a portrait of a man who was not just gentle and kind, but fiercely intelligent and deeply principled. He had not been running from the world. He had conquered it and deemed it unworthy of his soul. Finally, Walter slid a thick leather-bound binder across the polished mahogany table. "This," he said softly, "is the shield he left for you, the Scion Legacy Trust." He opened the binder, and the scale of her father's secret life unfurled before her. It was more staggering than she could have possibly imagined. Page after page detailed holdings in companies she recognized as titans of industry. There were early-stage investments in tech firms that had since revolutionized the world, generating returns that were thousands of times the initial outlay. There were vast portfolios in renewable energy and biomedical research. It was a visionary collection of assets built not on speculation, but on a deep belief in the future. "Your father never stopped being an investor," Walter explained. "He simply did it his way, quietly, ethically, and from a distance. The trust has been compounding for over 20 years, managed by a small, dedicated team, completely invisible to the outside world." Then Walter turned to the final section of the binder. "And this," he said, his voice lowering slightly, "is what I believe you came here for." He pointed to a line item under the heading Strategic Holdings. Her breath hitched. The trust held 1,500,000 Class A voting shares of Cranston Holdings purchased over a decade ago during a market downturn. 15%, Madeline whispered, tracing the name with a trembling finger. "What does that mean in practical terms?" "In practical terms," Walter said, leaning forward, "it means that you are the single largest outside shareholder of your husband's family company. It means no major corporate action, no merger, no significant sale of assets. No change in the corporate charter can happen without your block of votes. For years I have attended their board meetings via proxy, a nameless, faceless representative of an anonymous investor group they call the Hemlock Fund. They have complained about me, courted me, and cursed me, but they have no idea that the power to veto their dynastic ambitions has been sitting in this room the entire time." A cold, hard clarity washed over Madeline, eclipsing her grief. The slap, the humiliation, Genevieve's icy dismissal, they were acts of power committed against someone they believed was powerless. They had fundamentally miscalculated. They had waged war on a pauper, never realizing she was a queen in disguise. A plan began to form in her mind, cold and precise. It was not just about revenge anymore. That felt too small, too petty. This was about justice. It was about protecting her child from the toxic legacy of a family that valued power above all else. This was about cleansing the rot from the inside out. "Walter," she said, her voice now firm, all trace of tremble gone. "I want to understand everything. Every asset, every liability, every weakness in the Cranston Holdings portfolio. I want to know where Isidore has been careless, where his mother has made vanity projects that bleed money. I need their corporate playbook." Walter studied her, seeing the steel that had forged in the fire of her humiliation. He saw her father's analytical mind ignite behind her eyes. "Madeleine, you must understand what you are asking. This is a dangerous path. The Cranstons will fight back, and they will fight dirty." "They've already done their worst to me, Walter," she replied, her gaze unflinching. "They tried to break me in the most public way imaginable. They have no idea what I'm capable of now. They're expecting a messy divorce. They're preparing for a PR battle. They are not prepared for a boardroom war." She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. "My father built this incredible legacy, this shield. But a shield can also be a weapon. I want you to start quietly acquiring more shares. Use the disposable capital from the tech stocks. I don't want 15%. I want more." Walter nodded slowly, a grim but determined smile forming on his face. "And what is the end goal, Madeleine?" She looked out the window at the Cranston Tower, a monument to arrogance piercing the skyline. "The end goal? My husband and his mother believe their name makes them invincible. I'm going to prove them wrong. The end goal is to take their company, their legacy and their name away from them. I am going to leave them with nothing but the consequences of their actions." Over the next few weeks, Madeleine underwent a profound transformation. Walter's office became her classroom, and a small, secure apartment she leased became her war room. She traded her designer gowns for sharp business attire, her society luncheons for grueling all-night strategy sessions. She absorbed decades of financial knowledge with a ferocious intensity, her mind sharp and focused. The walls of her new home were not decorated with art, but with stock charts, corporate hierarchy, diagrams, and timelines. Meanwhile, the media storm surrounding the slap raged on a gift she hadn't anticipated. The viral video and endless commentary sent Cranston Holdings' stock into a slow, steady decline. While Genevieve was busy issuing press releases and sending Isidore to a sham anger management retreat, she was completely oblivious to the real threat. She was treating a mortal wound with a bandage. Underneath the cover of this public relations chaos, Walter's traders began their silent assault. Following Madeleine's direction, they used 3 different brokerage houses, buying small, irregular blocks of shares to avoid triggering automated trading alerts. Slowly, methodically, the number began to tick upward. 16%, 18%, 21%. Each percentage point was a quiet victory, a tightening of the noose. Madeleine was no longer the crying wife who had fled the gala. She was the architect of their ruin, meticulously laying the foundation for their demise. The Cranstons thought they were putting out a fire. They had no idea she was about to unleash a flood. The first tremor hit Cranston Holdings 6 weeks after the gala. Not as a thunderous clap, but as a quiet, insidious vibration that shook the company to its foundation. It arrived in the form of a bland, legally mandated filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission, a document so dense with legalese that its significance was almost missed. Genevieve was in the midst of a tense marketing meeting, discussing a new campaign to rehabilitate the Cranston brand image, when her chief counsel entered the room unannounced, his face ashen. He slid a tablet across the table, a single paragraph highlighted. An obscure investment group, Scion Acquisitions LLC, had officially crossed the 25% ownership threshold in Cranston Holdings, triggering a mandatory disclosure. Genevieve read the paragraph, her eyes narrowing. Scion Acquisitions. I've never heard of them, she said, her voice dripping with dismissal. Find out who they are. It's likely an over-leveraged fund trying to make a quick profit on our depressed stock. Make them an offer, buy them out, and make them disappear. But Scion Acquisitions could not be made to disappear. For 2 days, their team of high-priced lawyers and analysts scrambled digging through corporate registries and financial databases. The result was a frustrating dead end. Scion was a ghost, a financial entity shrouded in a labyrinth of offshore shell corporations, each layer leading to another registered in jurisdictions famed for their impenetrable secrecy. All they could ascertain was that this was not a random accumulation. It was a deliberate, methodical, and incredibly well-funded assault. The predator was inside the walls, but it remained invisible. It's a hostile takeover, Mother. Isidore recently returned from his retreat with a well-rehearsed narrative of regret, exclaimed, his voice high with panic. The scandal had stripped him of his arrogance, leaving behind a frantic, hunted look. He paced the length of her office, gesturing wildly. Someone is making a play for the company. It could be the Chen Consortium, or maybe Sterling Cross. Do not be a fool. Genevieve snapped her own fear, manifesting as icy contempt for her son's weakness. No one would dare. This is our company. Our name is on the building. But her words rang hollow, a desperate incantation against a gathering darkness. The stock price, which had just begun to stabilize, began to plummet as news of the mysterious new shareholder spread like wildfire through the financial world. Wall Street smelled blood in the water. While chaos reigned in the Cranston Tower, a serene, focused calm pervaded Madeline's new command center. From her sleek, minimalist apartment, she directed her campaign. The space was her war room, filled with monitors displaying not just market data, but leaked internal Cranston emails, architectural plans for their over-leveraged properties, and discreet reports from private investigators detailing Isidore's every move. Walter Hemlock was her general, but she had become the chief strategist, her mind once dedicated to the subtleties of Renaissance art, now demonstrating a terrifying aptitude for corporate warfare. His profligacy is our greatest weapon, Madeline observed one afternoon, pointing to a spreadsheet on the main screen. Look here. The Executive Wellness Retreat in Aspen. The invoices show it was booked for 20 executives, but the hotel records Walter's PI obtained show only 2 guests checked into the penthouse suite, Isidore Cranston and Bianca Reed. Walter nodded, a look of profound respect in his eyes. Your father had an incredible mind for numbers, Madeline, but you have a gift for seeing the story behind them. The narrative. And this is a very damning narrative. Madeline's next move was to deliver that narrative to the world. They carefully selected their weapon, Valerie Kent, the most tenacious investigative journalist at the Financial Chronicle, a Pulitzer Prize winner, with a reputation for being utterly incorruptible. An anonymous, encrypted digital package was sent to her, containing meticulously documented evidence of Isidore's embezzlement. It was a treasure trove of corruption, copies of wire transfers to a shell company owned by Bianca for design consultation on projects that didn't exist, flight manifests for the corporate jet showing dozens of personal trips to Paris, Monaco, and the Caribbean, all billed to the company, and the falsified expense reports from the wellness retreat. Simultaneously, a formal detailed whistleblower complaint was filed with the SEC's Enforcement Division, ensuring that an official investigation was not just likely, but inevitable. Madeleine had laid a perfect trap, and now she waited for it to spring. The headline story broke on a Tuesday morning, and it was an explosion. Cranston heir accused of embezzlement and corporate fraud amidst personal scandal. Valerie Kent's article was a masterpiece of journalistic destruction. It didn't just list the financial crimes, it wove them into the salacious tapestry of his affair with Bianca Reed, juxtaposing multi-million-dollar frauds with details of champagne-fueled parties and extravagant gifts. It painted a portrait of a corrupt, morally bankrupt scoundrel who had used his public company as a personal slush fund to cheat on his pregnant wife. The fallout was catastrophic. The stock nosedived, losing 30% of its value in a single day of frantic trading. The Cranstons were besieged. The board of directors, once a council of loyal sycophants, was now in open rebellion. Philip Crowley, a man who had known Isidore since he was a boy, convened a secret conference call with 4 other senior board members. The sentiment was unanimous: Isidore had to go. He was no longer just an embarrassment. He was a liability that threatened to sink them all. They would demand an emergency board meeting to force his resignation. This was the moment Madeleine and Walter had been waiting for. "They will try to cut Isidore loose to save the ship," Walter said, standing beside Madeleine as they watched the market chaos unfold on screen. "Genevieve will sacrifice her son to appease the shareholders. She will likely propose herself as the interim CEO, the steady hand to calm the storm." "She'll try," Madeleine said, her voice as cold as steel. "But Scion Acquisitions, as the largest shareholder block, will have something to say about that. It's time to call the meeting to a vote. And Walter—" She paused, turning to face him, her expression hardening with resolve. "I will be attending, in person." Walter's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He took a step closer, his voice low and concerned. "Madeleine, that's a tremendous risk. You'll be walking into a den of wolves. The moment you walk into that room, you reveal your hand completely. They will be prepared for you in any future negotiations." "This isn't a negotiation, Walter. This is the execution," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "For months they have controlled the narrative. I have been the poor wife, the victim, the commoner who wasn't strong enough. They tried to erase me, to reduce me to a footnote in their sordid story. I will not dismantle their empire from the shadows and let them spin this as some anonymous corporate raid." She walked to the window, looking out at the Cranston Tower, piercing the skyline. "They humiliated me in public in a room full of people. I will have my justice in a room full of people. They need to see my face when their world comes crashing down. They need to know without a shadow of a doubt who did this to them. There will be no ambiguity. There will only be the truth." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Friday. On that morning, Madeleine stood before the full-length mirror. The gala felt like a lifetime ago. Then she had chosen a gown to project a soft, hopeful image. Now she fastened the jacket of a bespoke power suit in a deep charcoal grey that was as severe and unforgiving as her intent. Her hair was not in soft waves, but pulled back into a tight, commanding chignon. Her makeup was flawless, a mask of impenetrable confidence. There was no trace of the bruised, weeping woman who had fled the gala. In her reflection, she saw a commander, an heiress not of money, but of a quiet librarian's hidden strength. She was her father's daughter, and she was ready for war. The Cranston Holdings boardroom was on the top floor of the tower, a sterile, glass-encased chamber designed to make men feel like gods looking down on the city they ruled. But on this day, the mood was not divine. It was funereal. The long obsidian table reflected the grim faces of the board members, the air thick with the unspoken terror of a dynasty on the brink of collapse. They were the city's old guard men who had sat on this board for decades, their fortunes and reputations inextricably linked to the Cranston name. Now that name was poison, and they could feel the ground shifting beneath their expensive leather chairs. Genevieve Cranston sat at the head of the table, a grim monarch presiding over a crumbling kingdom. She had spent a sleepless night marshalling her forces, calling in favors, and reminding board members of past loyalties. She looked outwardly compsentua, her posture rigid, her expression a mask of severe control. But inwardly, a frantic energy buzzed beneath her skin. Isidore was a necessary sacrifice, a weak link she had to sever to save the whole. Her plan was simple: express profound disappointment in her son, announce his immediate and permanent removal from all corporate duties, and position herself as the steady, experienced hand to guide the company through the storm. She believed she had secured just enough proxy votes to maintain control. Her primary concern was the representative from Scion Acquisitions. She pictured some slick, pinstriped corporate raider from a rival firm, a shark smelling blood and circling for a piece of her empire. She was prepared for a fight, ready to negotiate, to cede a few board seats to offer anything short of outright surrender. The heavy oak doors to the boardroom opened. Her head of security leaned in his face, pale. "The representative from Scion Acquisitions is here." "Send them in," Genevieve commanded, her voice like cracking ice. She clasped her hands on the table, bracing for the confrontation. The doors swung wide, and Madeline walked in. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. A wave of silent shock washed over the room. The low, anxious chatter ceased as if a switch had been flipped. Bernard Shaw, the portly chairman, let a pen drop from his nerveless fingers, the clatter echoing unnaturally in the sudden stillness. Every head turned, every jaw hung slightly slack. They were seeing a ghost, a spectre from the tabloids, the weeping, humiliated wife from the gala video. But the woman who entered was no ghost. She was a vision of cold, controlled power. Genevieve's face, a carefully constructed facade of authority, disintegrated in seconds. A flicker of confusion gave way to wide-eyed disbelief, which in turn curdled into a dawning, horrified comprehension. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin a pasty, waxen grey. She looked as though she'd been struck. "You—" She breathed the word, a ragged, strangled sound that carried all of her shock and revulsion. Madeline didn't spare her a glance. Her gaze, sharp and appraising, swept over the stunned faces of the board members, cataloguing their reactions. She walked with a deliberate, unhurried pace, her heels clicking a steady, resolute rhythm on the marble floor. Walter Hemlock followed a step behind his calm demeanor, and the heavy leather briefcase in his hand, lending an immediate air of gravitas and undeniable legal authority. Madeline stopped at the empty seat directly opposite Genevieve, a queen claiming her place on the battlefield. She placed her hands on the back of the chair, but did not sit. "Mrs. Cranston," Bernard Shaw stammered, finding his voice at last, as he pushed his glasses up his nose. "Madeline, we weren't expecting you. This is a private meeting for board members and invited representatives. This is highly irregular." "What is irregular, Mr. Shaw?" Madeline asked, her voice cool and clear, amplified by the room's perfect acoustics. She finally turned her eyes to him, and he flinched under the intensity of her gaze. "Is it that a significant shareholder has decided to attend a meeting that will determine the future of her investment? Or is it that you simply assumed that shareholder would be a man?" Bernard flushed a deep crimson and sank back in his seat, utterly silenced. Genevieve, recovering a sliver of her composure, sneered. "Enough of this charade. What is this, a pathetic, vengeful little stunt? Did you come here to beg for a more generous divorce settlement?" "I am not here for a settlement, Genevieve," Madeline replied, using the older woman's first name with a chilling familiarity that stripped her of her matriarchal status. "I am here for my company." She pulled out the chair and sat a picture of absolute command. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Madeline Cranston. I am the sole beneficiary of the Scion Legacy Trust, the holding company for Scion Acquisitions LLC. We are, as of the market's opening this morning, the proud owners of 32% of this company's voting shares. Please, let's begin." A collective gasp went through the room. 32%. It was an insurmountable figure. They were no longer in a negotiation. They were in a hostage situation. Madeline continued, her tone shifting from introduction to indictment. "For years you have all sat in this room and enabled the Cranstons to run this company like a personal fiefdom. You have rubber-stamped vanity projects and turned a blind eye to gross financial mismanagement, all in the name of loyalty to a family that saw you as nothing more than courtiers." Her gaze landed on Genevieve. "You and your son have treated shareholder funds as your private piggy bank. You've fostered a culture of corruption and arrogance that has now predictably led to a full-blown SEC investigation, federal fraud charges for your son, and a brand that is globally recognized as toxic." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle into the suffocating silence. "Your stock has lost nearly half its value. Your corporate partners are fleeing. Your reputation is in ashes. And you, Genevieve, called this meeting to ask for the authority to continue your disastrous reign. The arrogance is truly breathtaking." She gestured to Walter, who proceeded to place a thick, spiral-bound document in front of each board member. The cover read, "Scion Acquisitions LLC, a proposal for the restructuring and salvaging of Cranston Holdings." "This is our proposal," Madeline announced. "It is non-negotiable. It calls for the immediate removal of both Isidore Cranston and Genevieve Cranston from the board of directors and any and all positions, executive or advisory, within Cranston Holdings and its subsidiaries, effective immediately." Panic erupted. A board member named Philip Crowley, a long-time Cranston loyalist, sputtered, "This is absurd. Genevieve has dedicated her life to this company, and we can all see the results," Madeline shot back without missing a beat. "Loyalty is a fine sentiment, Mr. Crowley, but it doesn't excuse fiduciary negligence. Your duty is to the shareholders, not to a failing dynasty, and I am the largest shareholder." She leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly but losing none of its intensity. "Failure to ratify this proposal will result in the following Scion acquisitions. Will immediately initiate a tender offer to buy a controlling 51% of the company on the open market. Given the depressed stock price your mismanagement has created, this will be neither difficult nor expensive. Upon succeeding, our first act will be to dissolve the entire current board. All of you will be removed. Your golden parachutes will be challenged in court, and your professional reputations will be permanently tethered to the Cranston legacy of failure. It was a masterstroke of corporate warfare. She wasn't just threatening Genevieve. She was threatening all of them, their fortunes, their legacies. She had turned their self-interest into her most powerful weapon. "This is my family's company," Genevieve shrieked, her carefully controlled mask finally shattering completely. She stood up, her knuckles white where she gripped the table. "My father built this from nothing. You cannot do this. You are correct. It was your family's company," Madeline said, her voice softening into something even more lethal pity. "But you forgot the first rule of business. You don't own a public company, the shareholders do. And right now, the most significant shareholder is me. The woman your son beat in public. The woman you tried to discard like trash. Now, Mr. Shaw, I believe it is time to call a vote." The vote was a mere formality, a public execution. Bernard Shaw, looking utterly defeated, called each board member's name. One by one, the ayes came, some reluctant, some firm. Each one a nail hammered into Genevieve's coffin. Crowley, aye. Thompson, aye. With each vote, Genevieve seemed to shrink the life force draining from her until she sank back into her chair, a hollowed-out shell of the titan she once was. The vote was unanimous. As the meeting adjourned in a flurry of nervous energy, Genevieve remained frozen. Madeline rose and walked around the table, stopping directly in front of the once-feared matriarch. The other board members scurried away, not wanting to be near the final devastating exchange. "I will be raising my child to carry the Cranston name," Madeline said, her voice now quiet for Genevieve's ears alone. "But he will not be raised with your values of cruelty and entitlement. He will learn what your father knew and what you clearly forgot, that a name is worthless if the people who carry it have no honor. I will make the Cranston name mean something again, something you and Isidore destroyed." She looked at the broken woman before her one last time. "For what it's worth, I want to thank you. You and your son, you taught me a valuable lesson. You showed me the cage I was in, and then you gave me the rage I needed to break it open." With that, she turned and walked towards the doors, not looking back. The echo of the slap in the ballroom had finally faded, replaced by the deafening silence of absolute victory. Madeline stepped out of the boardroom and into the light, leaving Genevieve Cranston alone in the dark with the ruins of her empire. Madeline Cranston didn't just rebuild her life. She redefined a legacy. As the new chairwoman of the rebranded Scion Holdings, she purged the corruption invested in ethical ventures and turned the company into a model of modern corporate responsibility. She gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Thomas, named after the quiet librarian who had given her the strength to fight back. Isidore, facing federal charges and abandoned by everyone, pleaded guilty and received a prison sentence. Genevieve faded into obscurity, a bitter recluse in a mansion she could no longer afford. The story of Madeline Cranston became a legend in the business world, a testament to resilience and the quiet power that can rise from the ashes of betrayal. Her journey shows us that true strength isn't about the name you carry, but the character you build. If you were moved by Madeline's fight for justice, please hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. Don't forget to subscribe and to turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story of incredible real-life karma and triumph. Thank you for listening. What happens when a waitress drowning in debt and invisible to the world comes face to face with a billionaire's fury? We're not talking about a simple complaint. We're talking about a storm of power and rage, so intense it silences a five-star London restaurant. He's a man who can buy and sell entire city blocks, and he's about to ruin lives over a single mistake. He's already on his feet, his bodyguards moving in the end of a career for the terrified manager. But then the waitress does something impossible. She speaks 4 words. 4 words in a language no one expects, in a dialect so specific and personal, it stops the billionaire dead in his tracks. This isn't a story about good service. It's about a secret that connects 2 worlds and a single sentence that changes everything. The air in the Gilded Lyre. A bastion of old money and new power nestled in the heart of Mayfair, was usually thick with the scent of truffle oil and quiet confidence. Tonight, however, it was sharp with the metallic tang of fear. The source of this disturbance was a man at table 7, the most coveted alcove in the restaurant, a man whose presence usually guaranteed a level of hushed reverence, usually reserved for royalty. Khalid al-Jamil was not a king, but he was close. A Saudi construction and technology magnate, his net worth was a matter of public speculation and private awe. His face, usually a stoic mask of handsome, sun-weathered features, was currently a thundercloud of raw fury. His dark eyes, which had appraised multi-billion-dollar energy contracts with unnerving calm just that morning, were now fixed on the trembling restaurant manager, Mr. Davies. Incompetence. Khalid's voice was low, yet it cut through the muted clinking of cutlery across the entire dining room. It was a voice accustomed to absolute obedience, a voice that didn't need to be raised to command a legion. I do not tolerate incompetence, not in my boardroom, and certainly not when I am paying a small fortune for a piece of fish. The offending item lay on a pristine white plate, a Dover sole filleted tableside. The supposed error, a minuscule bone no larger than an eyelash, had been spotted by one of his 2 ever-present aides. For anyone else, it would be an oversight. For Khalid al-Jamil, on this particular day, it was a profound insult. It was the final crack in a dam that had been straining to hold back a flood of frustration all week. A colossal green energy deal, the legacy project of his career, had just imploded that afternoon, due to a betrayal he was still struggling to process. The bone was not the reason for his anger. It was merely the target. Mr. Davies, a man who had placated ambassadors and Hollywood stars, was visibly sweating. Mr. al-Jamil, I am profoundly sorry. It is an inexcusable lapse. Please allow us to remake the entire meal for you and your party. Of course, there will be no charge. No charge. Khalid let out a short, incredulous laugh that was devoid of any humor. Do you think this is about money? Do you have any idea who I am? He pushed his chair back, the sound scraping harshly against the marble floor. The entire restaurant flinched. His 2 bodyguards, monolithic men in tailored suits, moved with fluid precision, one stepping toward the door, the other placing a hand discreetly on the small of his boss's back. This is about standards, about a promise of perfection that you have failed to keep. We are leaving. Panic flashed in Mr. Davies's eyes. A walkout by Khalid al-Jamil wasn't just a bad review. It was a black mark on the ledger of London's elite. It was a story that would be whispered from Knightsbridge to Kensington. It was in this supercharged moment that Chloe Sterling moved. A waitress, not the head waiter, not the sommelier, not the manager, but a simple waitress who was meant to be invisible. 26 years old, with eyes that held a quiet weariness and a grace that came from balancing countless plates and expectations she had been serving the adjacent table. She had heard every word, felt every tremor of the billionaire's rage. She was supposed to clear her table, keep her head down, and let the manager handle the explosion. It was the smart thing to do. The safe thing to do. She had rent to pay and a life that couldn't afford a single ripple, let alone a tsunami like Khalid al-Jamil. But she had also seen something else. Beneath the volcanic anger, she saw a flicker of profound pain in his eyes. It was a look she recognized. It was the look of a man who wasn't just angry at the world, but wounded by it. She had lived in Riyadh for 10 years as a child, her father an engineer on a major urban development project. She hadn't just learned the language. She had absorbed the culture, the nuances, the proverbs, and the deep-seated importance of honor and respect. As Khalid turned to leave his formidable back to the room, Chloe took a small, steadying breath. She stepped forward past the petrified Mr. Davies. Her colleagues stared winged-eyed, certain she was about to be fired in the most spectacular fashion. She did not address his anger about the fish. She did not apologize for the restaurant. She spoke softly, her voice clear and steady in the suffocating silence. She spoke in an Arabic that was not the formal classical language of news anchors, but the warm, nuanced cadence of the Najd region, the very heartland of Saudi Arabia, where his family was from. Al-Karam fil wajh ya sheikh, she said. Generosity is written on the face, O sheikh. It was a simple poetic proverb, a phrase one's grandmother might say. It was intimate, respectful, and utterly, shockingly unexpected. Khalid al-Jamil froze. His entire body went rigid. His hand, which had been gesturing dismissively, stopped mid-air. He didn't turn around immediately. It was as if the words, spoken in a flawless, familiar accent, by a voice he had never heard, had erected an invisible wall in front of him. The sound of a London waitress speaking his mother tongue was improbable. The sound of her speaking it, with the accent of his childhood home, was impossible. His bodyguard looked at him confused. Mr. Davies stared at Chloe as if she had just sprouted wings. The entire restaurant held its breath. Slowly, deliberately, as if resisting a magnetic pull, Khalid al-Jamil turned around. His furious mask was gone. In its place was a look of profound, absolute astonishment. His dark eyes locked onto Chloe's, and for the first time that night, the billionaire looked utterly and completely silenced. The silence that followed Chloe's words was heavier than the fury that preceded it. Time seemed to warp in the gilded lyre. For Chloe, it felt like an eternity as the full weight of Khalid al-Jamil's gaze settled upon her. It was an intense, analytical stare, as if he were trying to deconstruct a complex equation. The anger had receded from his eyes, replaced by a piercing curiosity that was in its own way just as intimidating. "Repeat what you said," he commanded. His voice had lost its harsh edge, but it now carried the immense gravity of his full attention. Chloe's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. The rational part of her brain was screaming, "What have you done? You've overstepped. You've insulted him. You're fired." But the part of her that remembered dusty afternoons in Riyadh, the kindness of her childhood neighbors, and the deep respect for elders ingrained in her, held her steady. She met his gaze directly, a feat Mr. Davies had failed to accomplish all evening. "I said," she repeated her Arabic, just as fluid and natural as before, "Al-Karam fil wajh ya sheikh." Forgive me if I was improper. I only meant that the frustration I saw did not match the face of the man I was looking at. It was a masterful deflection, respectful and yet deeply personal. She wasn't just translating the proverb. She was explaining her intent, showing that she understood not just the words, but the cultural soul behind them. Khalid's aide, a younger man named Faisal, who had been silent until now, took a half-step forward, his expression a mixture of shock and concern. "Sir," Khalid raised a single commanding hand, silencing him without a glance. He took a step closer to Chloe, ignoring the manager who now seemed to have shrunk into the plush carpeting. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" he asked, his English returning, but now laced with a quiet intensity. "Not from a book, not from a university course in London." "I grew up in Riyadh, sir," Chloe answered simply. "My father was an engineer with Bechtel working on the Kingdom Centre project. We lived there for 10 years. The mention of the iconic Riyadh skyscraper, a project he knew intimately, was another small shock. He was no longer looking at a waitress. He was looking at a ghost from a past and a place he thought he had left behind in London. He saw a young Englishwoman in a black uniform, but he heard the echo of home. The carefully constructed walls he maintained between his business life in the West and his roots in the East had been unexpectedly breached. He studied her for another long moment. He saw the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the determined set of her jaw. She wasn't fawning or intimidated. She was simply present. In a world of sycophants and yes-men, her quiet, direct dignity was as startling as her accent. He made a decision. It was swift, unconventional, and entirely characteristic of the man who built his empire on gut feelings. He turned to the still frozen Mr. Davies. "The fish is forgotten, but my evening is ruined. I will not be staying." He then looked at his entourage. "Faisal, you and the security team wait for me in the car. I wish to speak with this young lady. Alone." Faisal's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. An order like that was unheard of. Khalid al-Jamil did not have private, unscheduled meetings with waitstaff. "Sir, is that wise?" "It is what I have decided." Khalid stated the finality in his tone, leaving no room for argument. His team, ever professional, melted away. The bodyguards were the last to leave, their eyes lingering on Chloe for a second too long, as if trying to assess a threat they couldn't comprehend. Soon the alcove at table 7 was occupied by only 2 people, the billionaire magnate and the waitress who had dared to speak to him. The rest of the restaurant staff, under a sharp glare from Mr. Davies, began to cautiously resume their duties, though the air of normalcy was a fragile facade. Khalid gestured to the chair opposite his. "Please, sit." Chloe hesitated. "Sir, I'm on duty." "You are not," he said, his voice leaving no room for debate. "For the next 10 minutes, you are my guest." With a feeling of unreality, Chloe sat down at the table she had only ever approached to serve. She smoothed her apron, her hands trembling slightly. "Your name?" he asked. "Chloe. Chloe Sterling." "Chloe Sterling," he repeated, tasting the name. "And you lived in my country. You understand our ways." "I believe so, sir. I was young, but I remember it fondly. The people were very kind to my family." He leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "Today I was dealt a heavy blow, a betrayal in business of the worst kind, by a man I trusted, an Englishman, as it happens." He paused, his eyes searching her face. "My entire legacy project, a solar energy initiative that would power a new city, is in jeopardy. I came here tonight to quiet the noise in my head. Instead, I found more incompetence, more disappointment." Chloe listened, her heart aching with a surprising pang of empathy for this incredibly powerful yet clearly wounded man. She said nothing, sensing that he didn't want platitudes. He wanted to be heard. "What you did," he continued, "was either incredibly foolish or incredibly brave. You saw a storm, and you walked directly into it." "Why?" Chloe thought for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Because the storm wasn't about the fish, sir, and the proverbs I learned as a child. They are about looking past the storm to see the man. I apologize if I presumed too much." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Khalid's lips for the first time. It transformed his severe face, hinting at a warmth buried deep beneath the surface. "You presumed correctly," he said. He sat back, a new idea taking root in his mind, an idea born of desperation and instinct. The man who had betrayed him, his longtime British consultant, had used a deep understanding of Western corporate culture to manipulate the deal, weaving a web of legal and financial complexities that Khalid's own team had failed to anticipate. He had been outmaneuvered not by numbers, but by nuance. Perhaps he thought the solution was to fight fire with fire. He needed a bridge, not just a translator, but someone who understood both worlds from the inside out. Someone who could see what his own people, blinded by their perspective, could not. "Miss Sterling," he began, his tone shifting from personal to professional with breathtaking speed. "This job you have, waiting tables, is it your passion, your life's ambition?" Chloe was taken aback by the question. "No, sir. It pays the bills. I was studying art history, but I had to stop. Family reasons." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Family reasons was a polite euphemism for her father's financial ruin and subsequent disappearance from her life. "I see." Khalid's eyes held a sudden sharp glint of opportunity. "I find myself in need of a consultant, someone with a unique skill set, a fluency not just in language but in culture, both of ours. The work would be demanding. The stakes are higher than you can imagine. But the compensation would ensure you never have to wait another table in your life." Chloe stared at him, her mind struggling to keep up. Was he offering her a job? A man she'd met 10 minutes ago? A man she had provoked in the middle of a tantrum? It sounded insane. "Sir, I don't understand. What would I be doing?" "You would be listening," Khalid said, standing up. "You would be observing, and you would be telling me what I am missing. You would be my bridge." He pulled a sleek black business card from his jacket. It was heavy, the lettering embossed in simple, elegant silver. "My assistant Faisal will be in contact to arrange a proper meeting. Be at the address on this card tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock sharp." He placed the card on the table between them. It lay there, a stark rectangle of black against the white linen, representing an impossible choice. "I do not make offers twice, Miss Sterling," he said, his voice once again the cool, commanding tone of a CEO. "I hope for your sake you are as brave as you appeared to be a few minutes ago." And with that, Khalid Al-Jamil turned and walked out of the Gilded Lyre, leaving Chloe Sterling sitting alone at his table. The entire restaurant watching her, and a single business card holding the weight of a future she could never have imagined. The address on the business card wasn't an office building. It was for the Corinthia Hotel, and the card specified the Royal Penthouse. Chloe stood before the grand entrance the next morning, feeling as though she were from another planet. Her best black trousers and a simple white blouse, which had felt professional and smart in her small flat in Clapham, now seemed woefully inadequate. The doorman, draped in a magnificent uniform, eyed her with polite suspicion until she uttered the name Al-Jamil. The effect was instantaneous. His posture straightened, and he ushered her inside with a deferential, "Of course, miss. Right this way." She was escorted to a private elevator that whisked her silently to the top floor. The doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer. The space was breathtaking, a 2-story cavern of glass, marble, and steel, with a panoramic view that stretched from the London Eye to the BT Tower. The city lay sprawled below them like a detailed map. Faisal Khalid's aide from the restaurant greeted her. Dressed in a razor-sharp suit, he was polite but formal, his eyes giving nothing away. "Miss Sterling, thank you for coming. Mr. Al-Jamil will be with you shortly. Can I offer you some coffee?" "Water." "Water would be lovely, thank you," Chloe said, her voice steadier than she felt. As Faisal attended to the drink, she walked towards the immense floor-to-ceiling windows. London looked so quiet from up here, the frantic energy of its streets reduced to a silent, flowing river of red buses and black cabs. It was a perspective of power, a vantage point from which the world and its problems seemed small and manageable. "It is a beautiful city, but it can also be treacherous." Khalid's voice came from behind her. He had entered so silently she hadn't noticed. He wasn't in a suit, but in a simple yet clearly expensive white linen shirt and dark trousers. He looked rested, the fury of the previous night completely gone, replaced by a calm, focused energy. "It all depends on your vantage point, I suppose," Chloe replied, turning to face him. "Precisely," he said, gesturing for her to sit on one of the plush white sofas. "From down there on the street, one must watch for every threat. The speeding car, the thief, the rival. From up here, one can see everything coming. That is what I am offering you, Miss Sterling. A new vantage point." He sat opposite her, as Faisal placed a crystal glass of water on the table. With a nod from his boss, the aide retreated to a discreet distance, leaving them to their conversation. "I will be direct," Khalid began. "The project I mentioned is called the Asyad Project. It is the cornerstone of my country's future energy plans, a network of solar farms in the Rub al-Khali Desert, powering a new smart city. It is my legacy. My partner in this venture was a British consulting firm, Sterling Cross Capital, led by a man named Robert Sterling. I trusted him for 10 years. He advised my company, Al-Jamil Enterprises, on all our Western investments." Chloe's blood ran cold. Sterling. The name hit her like a physical blow. It couldn't be. It was a common name. A coincidence. Her mind raced desperately, trying to dismiss the connection. Her father's name was Robert Sterling. He was a consultant, an engineer turned financier who had worked on international projects. But he had lost everything years ago. He had vanished from her life after a bitter falling out, leaving her and her mother to pick up the pieces. It couldn't be him. She forced herself to remain calm, to keep her expression neutral. "What happened?" she asked, her voice a little too tight. "He used my trust against me," Khalid said, his voice laced with cold fury. "He structured the contracts in such a way that at the last minute he could leverage a series of legal loopholes and environmental clauses he himself recommended we include to stall the project indefinitely. He then used that leverage to attempt a hostile takeover of the entire technology patent portfolio associated with the project. He didn't just want a bigger piece of the pie. He wanted to steal the entire bakery." Khalid stood up and paced in front of the window. "My lawyers are good, the best in Riyadh, but they think like Saudis. They do not understand the subtle poison of British corporate law. The old boys' network, the unspoken rules of the game here. Sterling played me perfectly. He used our culture's emphasis on a man's word and honor against me, all while hiding behind a mountain of Western legal jargon." He stopped and turned to face her. That is where you come in. I don't need another lawyer. I need a new perspective. I want to hire you, Miss Sterling. Your official title will be Special Consultant for Cross-Cultural Strategy. You will have access to all the project documents. You will sit in on my meetings with my legal team. Your job is to read, listen, and tell me what they are not seeing. You grew up in my world, but you were born in his. You are the bridge. You can translate not just the language, but the intent. The offer was staggering. The implications were terrifying. If this Robert Sterling was indeed her father, she would be hired to help destroy him. If he wasn't, it was just an unnerving coincidence. But her gut screamed at her. The ambition, the ruthlessness. It sounded exactly like the man she remembered. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Based on a proverb and 10 minutes in a restaurant." "Do not underestimate those 10 minutes, Khalid said firmly. "In those 10 minutes you showed more perception and courage than my entire executive team has shown in the last month. You were not afraid of my anger. You saw the root of the problem. That is a rare skill. I am a man who has built an empire on trusting my instincts, and my instincts tell me you are the key." He named a salary that made Chloe's head spin. It was more money than she had ever imagined earning in a decade, let alone a year. It was enough to pay off her student loans, find a new apartment, and live without the constant grinding fear of financial ruin. It was freedom. But what would it cost her? "I need to read the initial contract." She found herself saying the words coming out before she could stop them. "And the profile of the man who betrayed you, Robert Sterling." A flicker of respect showed in Khalid's eyes. She wasn't simply dazzled by the money. "Of course. Faisal will provide you with a preliminary file and a non-disclosure agreement. You can review it here. Take all the time you need." He motioned to his aide. Faisal approached with a tablet and a slim leather-bound folder. He placed them on the table in front of Chloe. "The NDA is standard," Faisal said coolly. "What you read in this file is not to leave this room, whether you accept the position or not." Chloe nodded, her hands clammy. She signed the document with a pen that felt heavier than a brick. Then, with a deep, trembling breath, she opened the tablet. The first document was a corporate profile of Sterling Cross Capital, and there on the screen was a professional headshot. Her world tilted on its axis. The face was older, the dark hair now streaked with grey at the temples, the lines around the eyes deeper. But it was him. It was unmistakably her father, Robert Sterling. The same confident, calculating smile that had always seemed to hide more than it revealed. The man who had promised her the world and then disappeared when his own came crashing down. He hadn't lost everything. He had reinvented himself. He had risen higher than ever before. And in his ascent, he had tried to ruin Khalid al-Jamil. Chloe felt a wave of nausea. She looked up from the screen, her eyes wide with a secret terror, and met Khalid's intense, expectant gaze. He was offering her a golden key to a new life. But to use it, she would have to help him lock the door on her own father's world, and she had no idea what monsters lay on either side. For a long moment, Chloe couldn't breathe. The air in the penthouse, once filled with the promise of opportunity, now felt thin and suffocating. The face on the screen was a spectre from a life she had tried to bury. Her father, the man whose absence had been a defining feature of her young adulthood. The man whose last words to her during a bitter phone call after he lost their family home were, "You have to be a predator in this world, Chloe, or you become prey. I just chose the wrong hunt." It seemed he had found a new one. "Is something wrong, Miss Sterling?" Khalid's voice cut through her paralysis. He had noticed the change in her, the sudden pallor of her skin, the way her hand trembled slightly as it rested on the tablet. Chloe's mind raced a chaotic whirlwind of panic and preservation. Tell him right now. He's my father." "I can't do this." The words formed in her throat, but died before they could escape. What would he do? Would he throw her out, disgusted by the association? Would he suspect her of being a spy, of being in league with her father? The life-altering opportunity would vanish, and she would be left with nothing but a dangerous secret. Another voice, colder and more calculating, a voice that sounded disturbingly like her father's, whispered a different path. "Say nothing. You owe him nothing. He abandoned you. This man Khalid is offering you a way out. Use it. Use what you know." She forced her expression into a mask of professional focus, a skill she'd honed over years of dealing with difficult customers. "No, sir. Nothing is wrong." She lied, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "I'm just absorbing the scale of the betrayal. It's audacious." Khalid nodded, accepting her explanation. "Audacious is one word for it. Now you see why I need a different kind of weapon in this war." "I accept your offer," Chloe said, the decision solidifying even as it terrified her. She was stepping off a cliff, not knowing if she would fly or fall. A look of satisfaction settled on Khalid's features. "Excellent. Faisal will handle the formalities of your contract and accommodations. You will have a suite here at the hotel. You start immediately. I want you to read everything. Every email, every contract, every addendum. I want you to live inside this project until you know it better than I do." The next few days were a blur. Chloe was plunged into the heart of Al Jamil Enterprises' London operation. Her life in the cramped Clapham flat became a distant memory, replaced by the opulent, sterile silence of her hotel suite. Days were spent in a glass-walled conference room, surrounded by Khalid's legal team, a group of sharp, serious men who initially viewed her with thinly veiled skepticism. She was the waitress consultant, an eccentric whim of their boss. Chloe said little in those first meetings. She listened. She absorbed the complex language of international finance and contract law, and she read. She devoured thousands of pages of documents, her past study of art history, the discipline of finding meaning in details, of understanding context and provenance, giving her a unique lens. But she wasn't just reading legal text. She was reading her father. In the precise, predatory wording of the clauses he had drafted, she recognized his voice. She saw his ambition, his meticulous planning, his utter ruthlessness. He had always been a brilliant strategist, a grand master of chess who saw people as pieces on a board. She remembered him teaching her the game as a child, his constant refrain being, "Think 10 moves ahead. Chloe, always control the center." In these contracts, she could see him controlling the center, laying traps months, even years in advance. She began to see the patterns his Saudi legal team had missed, not because they weren't smart, but because they didn't know the man. They saw a business adversary. Chloe saw a ghost. One evening, buried under a mountain of files in her suite, she found it. It was a sub-clause in an environmental impact assessment report attached to an appendix that was hundreds of pages long. It seemed innocuous. It stipulated that any discovery of potential archaeological significance on the proposed construction site would trigger an immediate and indefinite project halt, pending a full investigation by a UNESCO-affiliated panel. Khalid's team had dismissed it as standard boilerplate. But Chloe knew her father. He was not a man who cared for history or archaeology. He only cared for leverage. She cross-referenced the coordinates of the proposed solar farm site with geological and historical survey maps. It took hours, but she found what she was looking for, a series of old academic papers speculating about the location of a lost city of the Ubar civilization, the so-called Atlantis of the Sands. The speculated location was right on the edge of Khalid's proposed site. It was a long shot, a fringe theory, but it was enough. Her father hadn't just relied on legal loopholes. He had planted a cultural bomb, a trigger that would mire the project in an international heritage dispute, a public relations nightmare that the Saudi government would be desperate to avoid. He would use the delay to bleed Khalid dry and seize the patents. It was brilliant, it was diabolical, and it was pure Robert Sterling. At that moment, she felt a profound sense of cold clarity. She was not helping a stranger against another stranger. She was caught in a war between two titans, one of whom was her own flesh and blood. And she was the only person in the world who understood the enemy's strategy. The next morning, she walked into the conference room and interrupted the lead counsel mid-sentence. "You're looking in the wrong place," she said, her voice clear and firm, cutting through the legal jargon. All eyes turned to her. The skepticism was still there, but now it was mixed with curiosity. She walked to the head of the table where Khalid was sitting, his face an impassive mask. She placed the archaeological survey map next to the environmental impact report. "Mr. Al-Jamil," she began, "your problem isn't in the financial contracts. It's buried in the sand." She proceeded to lay out her discovery, connecting the obscure clause to the academic theories explaining the cultural and political leverage it would give her father. She spoke of his methods, his way of thinking, not revealing how she knew, but presenting it as a logical analysis. "This man doesn't fight on one front," she explained. "He creates a multi-front war. He attacks your finances, your legal standing, and your reputation all at once. You've been focused on the legal and financial battle, but the reputational attack is the one he will use to deliver the killing blow." As she spoke, the atmosphere in the room changed. The lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. Faisal stared at her, his professional reserve finally cracking to reveal a look of sheer astonishment. Khalid remained silent, his eyes fixed on her, listening to every word. When she finished, a long silence hung in the air. He finally looked away from her and at his lead counsel. "Did any of you see this?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The lawyer, a proud and decorated man, could only stammer, "No, sir. We considered it a negligible risk." "A negligible risk," Khalid repeated flatly. He turned his gaze back to Chloe, and for the first time she saw something more than curiosity in his eyes. It was a deep, profound respect. "You have just saved us months of time and millions of dollars, Miss Sterling." He stood up. "The old strategy is dead. From now on, we follow a new one. We will listen to Miss Sterling." In that moment, Chloe was no longer the waitress consultant. She was the lead strategist in a multi-billion-dollar corporate war. And her primary weapon was the intimate, painful knowledge of the man she was trying to destroy her own father. The balance of power in Khalid al-Jamil's inner circle shifted overnight. Chloe was no longer a peripheral figure. She was at the epicenter. Khalid moved her from the conference room to his private office in the penthouse where they worked side by side, often late into the night, poring over maps, financial projections, and psychological profiles of the key players at Sterling Cross Capital. It was a strange, intense intimacy. Chloe learned the rhythms of his day, the strong, unsweetened coffee he drank at dawn, the way he would fall silent and stare out at the city, when deep in thought the faint scent of oud that clung to his clothes. He in turn began to rely on her for more than just strategy. He started to ask for her opinion on other matters, valuing her clear, unvarnished perspective. He opened up to her in small, unguarded moments. He spoke of his late wife, Layla, who had died years ago. He described her as the anchor of his life, and confessed that since her passing, his work had become a fortress to keep the grief at bay. He spoke of his vision for the Asiad project, not as a source of profit, but as a promise to her a way to build a better future. She believed that power was a responsibility, not a privilege, he told Chloe one evening, as they watched the city lights ignite below them. She would have despised a man like Robert Sterling, who uses his brilliance only to acquire, never to build. Every word was a small dagger in Chloe's heart. The guilt was a constant, heavy cloak. She was earning this man's trust, his respect, even his friendship, all while harboring a monumental secret. She was using the memories of her childhood, the games of chess, the overheard conversations, the understanding of her father's psychology as weapons in this corporate war. Her insights were devastatingly effective. My father, I mean Sterling. She corrected herself quickly, her heart skipping a beat. Is a narcissist. He needs to be the smartest man in the room. He will have planned for you to fight back legally. He wants that. It's a battle he knows how to win. What he won't expect is for you to ignore him. Ignore him? Khalid asked, intrigued. He is holding my legacy hostage. Don't fight him on the UNESCO clause, Chloe advised. Embrace it. Announce publicly that in light of potential archaeological sensitivities identified by your own due diligence, your diligence not his, you are proactively funding a state-of-the-art archaeological survey of the region. Frame it as Al Jamil Enterprises being a custodian of national heritage. You'll be praised for it. You'll take his weapon and turn it into a shield. He can't use a threat that you've already neutralized and turned into good publicity. Khalid was stunned by the audacity of the plan. It was counterintuitive, expensive, and brilliant. He put the plan into motion. The press release was picked up by international news agencies. Khalid was lauded for his corporate responsibility. In a single move, Robert Sterling's hidden leverage was rendered useless. Chloe's next insight was even more personal. He surrounds himself with people who are competent, but not as smart as he is. His second-in-command, a man named David Chen. My father would have cultivated a sense of dependency in him. Chen is likely the one doing the real work, but Sterling takes the credit. If you put enough pressure on the company, Sterling will sacrifice Chen to save himself. Acting on this, Khalid's legal team initiated a targeted legal action aimed directly at the division. Chen managed citing specific contractual irregularities Chloe had identified. The pressure was immense. As Chloe predicted, Sterling Cross Capital began to show cracks. Robert Sterling was being outmaneuvered, and he couldn't understand how. Khalid al-Jamil, who he had seen as a straightforward, if powerful foreign businessman, was suddenly playing corporate chess with the skill of a grandmaster. The moves were subtle, creative, and seemed to anticipate his own strategy before he even enacted it. He felt like he was fighting a shadow, someone who knew his playbook page by page. He grew paranoid, suspicious of everyone on his team. For Chloe, the success was terrifying. She lived on a razor's edge. A single slip of the tongue referring to Sterling as my father, revealing a detail she couldn't possibly know from the documents alone, would bring everything crashing down. The stress was immense. She had nightmares of Khalid's warm respect turning to cold fury. The same fury she had witnessed in the restaurant, but this time directed at her. One afternoon, Khalid found her staring blankly at a spreadsheet, her face pale and drawn. "You are carrying a heavy burden, Chloe," he said gently, his voice startling her. He had started using her first name in their private meetings. "The work is demanding," she deflected. "It is more than that," he insisted, his dark eyes searching her face. "I have asked you to walk into the mind of a very dark man. It is taking its toll. Perhaps we should take a break this evening. There is a private concert at the Barbican Center. A friend of mine is conducting. It would be good for you to see something beautiful after staring at so much ugliness." The offer was personal, a clear line being crossed from a purely professional relationship. Part of her, the lonely young woman who hadn't had a real friend in years, desperately wanted to accept. But the other part, the part that housed her terrible secret, screamed that it was a mistake. Getting closer to Khalid only made her deception more profound, more painful. "I can't," she said more abruptly than she intended. "I need to finish reviewing these investment portfolios." A flicker of disappointment crossed his face, but he masked it quickly. "As you wish. Do not work too late." He left the office, and Chloe buried her face in her hands. The isolation was crushing her. She was succeeding beyond her wildest dreams, but she was utterly terrifyingly alone, trapped between a past she couldn't escape and a future built on a lie. She was winning a war for a man she admired by betraying the blood of a man she despised, and she was starting to lose herself in the process. The razor's edge was cutting deeper every day. Robert Sterling was a man cornered, and cornered men are dangerous. His meticulously planned corporate assault on Khalid al-Jamil was not just failing. It was being systematically dismantled with an unnerving prescience. Every strategy was anticipated, every trap disarmed. It felt as if his opponent could read his mind, and the sensation was maddening. Consumed by a gnawing paranoia, he did what he always did when threatened. He gathered intelligence. He hired a discreet private investigator, tasking him with one simple objective: identify the brain behind al-Jamil's new strategy. The report that landed on his desk was thin, but its contents were explosive. It contained surveillance photos of Khalid's inner circle, and one face stood out. It was a young woman, identified as a new consultant named Chloe Sterling, whose previous job was listed as a waitress. Robert stared at the grainy photo of his daughter's face, and the world tilted on its axis. Chloe. It was impossible. He hadn't seen her in 3 years, not since his own financial ruin had shattered their family. And now she was here, allied with his enemy, the architect of his downfall. The betrayal felt absolute, a dagger forged from his own blood. He didn't wait. 2 evenings later, as Chloe stepped out of the Corinthia Hotel for a breath of crisp night air, a black sedan slid silently to the curb. The tinted rear window glided down, revealing the face she hadn't seen outside of her nightmares. "Get in the car, Chloe," Robert Sterling said. His voice was unnaturally calm, which made it all the more menacing. She froze, her heart seizing in her chest. "I have nothing to say to you." She turned to retreat into the safety of the hotel. "If you walk away," he called after her, his voice rising slightly, "I will have this conversation in the hotel lobby. I am certain Mr. al-Jamil would be fascinated to learn the true identity of his brilliant new consultant." It was a perfect trap. He had always known how to corner her. Defeated, she opened the car door and slid inside. The opulent leather interior felt suffocating, filled with the scent of his cologne and years of unspoken resentment. The car pulled silently into the stream of London traffic. "How could you?" he began, his voice a low hiss of fury. "My own daughter, conspiring with him against me. Tell me, what was the price for your loyalty? How much did he pay you to forget your own name?" A surge of long-suppressed anger burned away her fear. "You want to talk about loyalty?" she shot back, her voice trembling but strong. "You who vanished when your own risks blew up in your face, you who left us to pick up the pieces of the life you broke, you don't get to use the words family or loyalty with me. You surrendered that right years ago." The truth of her words hit him, but he deflected his tactics, shifting instantly from aggression to manipulation. The anger in his face was replaced by a mask of paternal concern she knew all too well. He reached across the seat and placed a hand on hers. She flinched. "Chloe, listen," he said, his voice now soft and persuasive. "That was a mistake, and I've paid for it. But this is our chance to get it all back. We're the same, you and I. We're survivors. This Al-Jamil is just using you for your insight. When he's done, he'll discard you. But you are my blood. We can win this together. Just tell me his next move. That's all I need. Everything I gain, half of it, will be yours. A real legacy for our family." It was the same hollow promise he had always made, a kingdom built on a foundation of sand. She looked at his desperate eyes and saw not a father, but a frightened man terrified of losing. In that moment, a profound and sorrowful clarity washed over her. The guilt and fear she had carried for weeks vanished. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled her hand from beneath his. "The difference between us," she said, her voice steady and clear, "is that you think winning is all that matters. I've learned that how you win is what defines you." She turned to the driver. "Stop the car." Robert stared at her, disbelief warring with rage. He had played his final card, and it had failed. "You're a fool," he snarled, the mask of charm gone completely. "You're choosing him over your own father." "No," Chloe replied, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. "I'm choosing myself." She opened the door and stepped out onto the pavement. She didn't look back as the black car sped away, disappearing into the river of taillights. The confrontation she had dreaded had come, and it had not broken her. It had set her free. She turned and began the walk back to the hotel, her purpose clear. The game was over. It was time to tell Khalid everything. Chloe walked back into the Corinthia, not with the fear of an employee, but with the quiet resolve of a woman who had made her choice. She found Khalid in his penthouse office, a dark silhouette against the vast, glittering expanse of the London skyline. He turned as she entered, a welcoming smile on his face that quickly faded as he registered her solemn expression. "Chloe, what has happened?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "I have to tell you the truth," she began, her voice steady, despite the frantic beating of her heart. "Something I should have told you the day we met. Please just hear all of it." He gestured to a chair, his full undivided attention on her. As they sat opposite each other, the truth spilled out. "Robert Sterling is my father," she said, the words hanging in the air between them. She explained everything. The painful estrangement after his financial collapse, the shock of seeing his face in the file, and the lie of omission she had maintained out of fear and a desperate desire for the opportunity he was offering. She recounted every detail of the confrontation that had just occurred, her father's manipulative plea for her to betray Khalid and her absolute refusal. When she finished, she looked him in the eye, fully prepared for the explosion of rage she had once witnessed. Khalid remained silent for a long moment, his gaze intense and analytical. He was processing every word, re-evaluating every interaction, every brilliant insight she'd had. He wasn't seeing a deceiver, but a woman who had been walking a razor's edge, fighting a war, both for him and within herself. "You deceived me," he finally said, his voice level and devoid of emotion. Her heart sank. "You placed my entire legacy at risk by hiding this connection. By all rights, I should end your employment this instant." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "However," he continued, his tone shifting when faced with an ultimate test, a choice between blood and honor, "you chose honor. Your father came to you to betray me, and instead you have come to me to betray his secret. In doing so, you have not lost my trust. You have finally and completely earned it." A wave of relief so profound it left Chloe light-headed, washed over her. The heavy cloak of her secret had finally been lifted. "He is desperate and blind," Khalid stated, standing up, his energy now focused and formidable. "It is time to end this. Together." The final move was not a direct financial assault, but an elegant trap designed by Chloe to prey on the one vulnerability she knew her father could not control: his own ego. Instead of attacking his company, they laid a trail of sophisticated false information. The breadcrumbs leaked through trusted channels hinted at a critical weakness in Al Jamil Enterprises' financial structure, a golden opportunity for a hostile takeover, an opportunity too perfect for a narcissist like Robert to resist. Blinded by arrogance and his desperate need for a final victory, Robert Sterling took the bait. He poured all of his company's liquid capital and took on immense loans to launch his attack, believing he was about to seize the crown from a wounded king. The trap was sprung in the sterile quiet of a Mayfair boardroom at a meeting Robert himself had called to announce his triumph. Instead of a broken Khalid, he was met by Khalid Chloe and a team of forensic accountants. They calmly revealed that the weakness was a fiction and that his buyout attempt was based on manufactured premises. In the same breath, Khalid revealed his checkmate move. While Robert was busy chasing ghosts, Khalid had quietly purchased all of his company's outstanding debt. In a single brilliant stroke, Robert Sterling was ruined. He hadn't just lost the deal, he had lost everything. He was financially and professionally destroyed, a predator caught in a snare he never saw. He stared across the polished table, his face ashen first at the implacable gaze of Khalid, and then at his daughter. Chloe met his eyes not with triumph, but with a quiet, sorrowful finality. That moment marked the end of one life for Chloe, and the true beginning of another. In the months that followed, as the new director of Western Strategy for Al Jamil Enterprises, she oversaw the triumphant relaunch of the Asiad project. Her relationship with Khalid had evolved into a powerful and respectful partnership, forged in crisis and solidified by trust. She was no longer the invisible waitress or the daughter of a disgraced man. She was a woman who had faced down her past, chosen her own code of honor, and built a future she had earned, not inherited. Chloe's story reminds us that the most powerful people aren't always the ones with the most money or the loudest voice. Sometimes it's the person who listens, the person who sees beyond the surface, the person who holds on to their integrity when it would be easier to let it go. She started as a waitress, invisible to the world, but by using her unique past and her inner strength, she changed her own destiny and the future of a billion-dollar legacy. Her story is a testament to the fact that your circumstances don't define you. Your choices do. Even in your darkest moments, a single act of courage, a single moment of truth can change everything. If this story of courage, secrets, and redemption moved you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own hidden strength. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story about the incredible moments that change lives forever. Thank you for listening.